All right, let's dive in. Imagine exploring an organization that doesn't just trace its history back centuries, but, well, claims roots stretching into the deepest past, intertwined with ancient civilizations, foundational religious ideas, and the very craft of building.
Yeah, an organization that says it holds a secret doctrine, not hidden away exactly, but passed down through the ages.
Sounds like a compelling mystery, doesn't it?
It absolutely captures the imagination, and today that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking a deep dive into Freemasonry, guided by a specific source you've shared with us, an address titled The Fellowship of Masonry.
That's key. We're not attempting a definitive, all-encompassing history or definition of Masonry from every possible angle. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack this author's vision, drawing out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from their perspective on what Masonry is.
Where it comes from, what its purpose is, and what it aspires to be, especially considering the time this address was given.
Right. We're exploring what this particular speaker saw as the essence and the journey of this mighty fellowship, helping you understand the core message they were trying to convey.
Exactly, through this specific piece.
So let's start at the beginning of this source. How does the author define Masonry at its fundamental level?
Well, the very first thing they present is that Masonry is an earnest fellowship of tried and true men. There's an immediate acknowledgement of past human failures and present human limitations, which is quite a, well, pragmatic starting point.
Okay.
But despite those imperfections, it's described as being animated by the loftiest human aspirations for the future. So, a group of imperfect men striving for something noble.
Okay, so it's about the striving, not necessarily claiming perfection.
Hmm.
But the author suggests there's a deeper way to understand it, right? It's not just about joining a group.
Precisely. The source states that the key to truly grasping what Masonry is lies in understanding the esoteric meaning of its philosophy. Yeah, this term esoteric implies a meaning that isn't immediately obvious, something perhaps hidden or requiring initiation and study to fully comprehend.
Like a layer beneath the surface.
Exactly. And the author is quite clear about the highest ideals that form the bedrock of this esoteric understanding. They name them explicitly: brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Ah, the three principles.
Yes, these three concepts are presented as the fundamental principles that define what this fellowship is meant to be about at its deepest level.
Brotherly love, relief, and truth, the core ideals. Now, the address uses a really vivid metaphor to describe the state of Masonry at the time it was delivered, which was 1917, right? Right in the middle of World War I. The author calls it an awakening giant.
That image is powerful, isn't it? It's depicted as a sleeping giant awakening, sensing a resurgence or a new vital force. The author feels the spirit of Masonry is actively permeating the mighty fellowship, suggesting a collective energy and purpose is stirring within the organization itself.
Not just among individuals.
Right, not just among individual members.
And this awakening is tied directly to the historical context of that time.
Absolutely. The author links it to being aroused to the call of humanity in a time of trial. They reflect on Masonry's origin, stating it was born amid suspicion, hate, and nations knowing not peace, nor brotherly love, nor divine truth.
Wow.
This perspective frames Masonry's very existence as a response to a world steeped in conflict and lacking these fundamental virtues, you see.
So its purpose, as presented here, is tied to repairing that fractured world.
Precisely. Its explicit purpose is to evolve a philosophy of moral and social virtues, which should cement the sons of men of diverse nations by unbreakable bonds of fellowship.
So it's not just personal self-improvement.
No, it's framed as a proactive mission to use its philosophy to build unity and connection between people from different countries, particularly vital during a global conflict like World War I.
Okay, so at its heart, a fellowship of men striving for high ideals, seeking a deeper esoteric understanding rooted in brotherly love, relief, and truth, and sensing a call to build bridges between nations in a world struggling with conflict. This leads us to one of the most striking aspects of the address: its claims about an ancient lineage and a secret doctrine.
Right. This is where the author makes some really sweeping historical claims. A central assertion is that Masonry is the propagator of a secret doctrine.
And how ancient is this doctrine claimed to be?
The source states it's older than the oldest church, more enduring than the most ancient religion. I mean, that's a bold declaration.
It really is, positioning it before established religion.
Significantly so. This doctrine, according to the author, has spread slowly, girdling the globe, and has historically gathered the very best of every civilization into its fold.
So it's presented as a force that has attracted and united exceptional individuals across different cultures and eras.
Yes, and the author claims that by 1917, when this address was written, this doctrine has resulted in Masonry standing as a mighty force, fearless in its sublime principles, and confident in its ultimate achievement through the practical application of its underlying ideas.
That practical application is crucial. It's not just abstract knowledge, then.
Exactly. The core dogma, the fundamental principle derived from this ancient doctrine, is reiterated and emphasized: the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man.
That sounds very familiar.
It's presented as the absolute bedrock of Masonry's teaching in this text.
And the divine connection is essential to this.
Absolutely. The vitality and strength of Masonry, according to this author, depends absolutely upon unfaltering faith in the grand architect of the universe.
The grand architect.
Yes, a common Masonic reference to a supreme being. The author makes it clear that this faith is fundamental to the organization's very existence and purpose.
And this faith, combined with the core dogma, underpins those unbreakable bonds of fellowship mentioned earlier.
Yes, those deep connections between members are described as being cemented by ties of true Masonic fellowship, quite unbreakable even in death. It suggests a bond that, well, transcends the physical life of the individual.
So we have this ideal picture, a high-minded fellowship rooted in an ancient secret doctrine, centered on faith in a supreme being and universal brotherhood.
Creating bonds that are both profound and lasting.
Now let's move from the ideal to the physical reality at the time this address was given and look at the sheer scale and potential the author describes.
Right. The address provides some impressive numbers for the time, highlighting the organization's reach. It mentions nearly 2 million members in the United States alone.
Wow, 2 million back then.
Spread across numerous governing bodies called Grand Lodges.
And it wasn't just a phenomenon limited to the U.S. or England, was it?
Far from it. The address lists its presence across the globe. Hundreds of thousands of Masons in Canada, significant numbers or multiple Grand Lodges in Germany, South America, Australia, India, and a presence in many other countries across Europe, the Americas, Africa, the West Indies.
So it's really global.
The specific numbers aren't as important as the overall picture they paint, that these figures demonstrate the universality of the Great Brotherhood. It was a genuinely worldwide fraternity at the time. And seeing the scale, the author suggests, allows you to sense its wondrous potentiality for good.
And this potential is linked directly back to the historical moment, the context of World War I.
Precisely. The author makes a direct prediction, quite hopeful given the global conflict, that the lines of fellowship are drawn closer, ever closer, a happening sure to come with the termination of the present World War.
So the war itself might strengthen these bonds.
That's the hope expressed here. The shared global trial is seen as a potential catalyst for strengthening these international Masonic bonds.
And the author feels it's particularly fortunate that Masonry possesses this scale and potential at this specific time.
Yes, they emphasize it's fortunate that this is so, because new problems today confront the sons of men. Mighty issues must be faced by the nations of the world. The organization's widespread presence and structure are viewed as resources needed to address the challenges the world would face after the war.
So it has a practical mission tied to global recovery, almost humanitarian.
Exactly. The author sees it as ours the task to minister to the peoples of Europe, emerging supine from the dread cataclysm of war. This ministry isn't just symbolic, it involves meeting their pressing need with true Masonic fellowship and, importantly, Masonic charity. It's presented as an active role in humanitarian relief and rebuilding.
How does the author position Masonry relative to other forces in the world at that time?
It's described as one of the world's great forces ever struggling along a common highway of human utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism.
Yeah.
Meaning practical benefit.
Yeah, practical benefit or usefulness to humanity, it seems. They acknowledge there are others less constructive, but argue that the force best fitted to cope with the new needs of humankind will longest endure. Masonry, in this view, is uniquely equipped for the post-war challenges due to its nature and reach.
And the author believes Masonry's past actions demonstrate it will meet these future challenges.
That's the argument, yes. Gauging future probabilities by past performances, this Masonry of ours will not be found wanting. The historical track record, as interpreted by the author, suggests resilience and capability.
So we've seen the grand vision, the historical claims, the scale, and the stated purpose. But the address also points to a significant internal challenge, something the author identifies as a major weakness.
Yes, it pulls back the curtain a bit and highlights one of our greatest weaknesses. This is identified as the failure of many Masons through indifference, lack of time, environment, or opportunity to familiarize themselves with the glorious history and traditions of the order.
So despite all this rich history and philosophy, many members aren't actually engaging with it. That seems like a problem.
Precisely. The author describes those who go through the initiation ceremonies, who are raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason and hurried through the higher degrees, but who ultimately glean but the slightest knowledge of what Masonry truly represents beyond the ritual itself.
They participate, but they don't necessarily understand, like going through the motions.
Exactly. These members are depicted as proudly wearing the emblems of the order, but having only a dim conception that these symbols stand for something significant and that membership offers somewhat superior standing.
And when asked to explain, they can't.
The author gives specific examples of questions these members are lost for a reply to. What is Masonry doing today? What does it stand for? What has it ever done? The unfortunate reality, according to the source, is they do not know.
Ouch. That points to a crucial gap between simply being a member and truly understanding and embodying the craft.
It does, and this lack of understanding highlights that Masonry, from this perspective, isn't something you automatically get just by joining.
No passive absorption.
The author makes this abundantly clear. For each individual brother, Masonry is what he makes it. The deeper philosophy, they argue, will not unfold itself to his ken without individual effort. You have to actively seek it out and study.
And the ritual itself, while important, isn't sufficient on its own according to this view.
The address discusses the role of ritual, mentioning the instruction of the worshipful master and the ritualistic drama, specifically the stories woven around King Solomon's temple and the figure of Hiram Abiff.
Central Masonic narratives.
Right, central to basic Masonic degrees. This ritual, the author says, is imparted. However, much or little of the strange ceremonies he may grasp.
So the meaning is in the ritual, but the listener, the participant, has to actively receive it.
Right. For some, the author regrets the little that they carry from the lodge room is indeed of small value. There's a critique of the expectation that someone rushed through the 32 degrees of the Scottish Rite, for example.
That's a specific system of advanced degrees, right?
That rushing through won't automatically convey the full beauty, the hidden meanings, and real philosophy, unless they follow up with thoughtful reading, mentioning works like Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma or other educational materials.
So it's not enough to just perform or witness the ritual.
No. Study and reflection are necessary for understanding, according to this author.
This underscores the idea that understanding the philosophy requires effort beyond just participating in the lodge activities. It's about engaging the mind. Speaking of understanding history, the address goes into considerable detail to support its claims of ancient origins. Let's look at how it traces these roots.
Okay. The author relies on the work of what they call arduous labors of thoughtful Masonic students associated with prominent research lodges of the time.
Like the Quatuor Coronati in London.
Exactly. Ars Quatuor Coronati Lodge of London and the National Masonic Research Society of Iowa are mentioned. These groups, the address claims, have once for all dispelled any lurking doubts entertained as to the true antiquity of Masonry.
So the claims aren't just tradition. They're presented as being validated by scholarly Masonic research of that era.
That's the framing, yes. And a key figure cited is Albert Pike, referred to as the father of Masonic philosophy.
What was Pike's perspective on Masonry's origins, according to this source?
Well, the address describes Pike's conception as something more imposing and majestic, solemnly mysterious and grand. Pike, in this view, saw Masonry's true essence in its symbolism, which, in its spirit of brotherhood, comparing it to ancient wonders like the pyramids and Sphinx.
Implying hidden knowledge like those monuments.
Precisely. And the symbolism is the link to this deep past.
That's the idea. According to Pike, as presented here, the symbolism and doctrines are incredibly ancient, predating even figures like Zarathustra or Zoroaster.
Wow.
The source quotes Pike stating that the true greatness and majesty of Freemasonry lie in its proprietorship of these and its other symbols, and that its symbolism is its soul. The symbols are seen as the containers of this ancient, timeless knowledge.
Interesting. The author then connects this symbolism found in Masonry to ancient faiths and philosophies more broadly.
They argue that history reveals close connection between the faiths and philosophies of widely separated peoples. This isn't seen as mere coincidence, but as a result of unchanging human nature and the universal endless quest for truth.
a common human drive.
Right. Before widespread literacy or books, ideas were expressed through architecture, through the use of various symbols, and the address points out that symbols fundamental to building, like the square, compasses, plumb, and level,
Oh, working tools.
exactly, were also used by the architects, who are presented as blood brothers of the accepted Masons, drawing a direct connection between the operative craft and the philosophical fraternity.
Okay, so that connects the tools to the philosophy. This naturally leads to the specific claim about an Egyptian origin.
Yes, the address focuses heavily on the work of Giovanni Belzoni, an Italian explorer and archaeologist who conducted excavations in Egypt in the early 19th century.
Belzoni, I think I've heard the name.
The author asserts that Belzoni's discoveries in the tombs of the kings, quote, established the existence of Masonry among the ancient Egyptians, a Masonry working upon the same basic principles as our modern Masonic philosophy.
That's a huge claim. What kind of findings led to this conclusion, according to the source?
Well, the address highlights interpretations of painted images and hieroglyphs found in a specific tomb, that of Pharaoh Osiris. Belzoni, as interpreted by the author, found what he believed were symbolic representations and even details about ancient Egyptian ritual objects, like the form of their Masonic apron, which is claimed to have been triangular and associated with royalty.
So, interpreting ancient Egyptian art and artifacts as evidence of early Masonic practices, that feels like a leap, maybe?
It's definitely interpretation presented strongly here. The claim is that this particular tomb was dedicated to the Masonic mysteries, blended and united with emblems of discoveries, inventions, and sciences, suggesting a blend of spiritual and scientific knowledge.
Okay.
The conclusion drawn from Belzoni's work is that Freemasonry in this early age was very different from what it is now, but had attained a grandeur unknown in Europe at the time of Pharaoh Osiris.
And were there later discoveries that, according to the source, confirm this?
The address mentions that later discoveries in Egypt, as the finding of Masonic emblems in the foundations of the obelisk, confirmed Belzoni's claim. This is presented as reinforcing the initial findings.
Right.
The author then brings in the perspective of Enoch T. Carson, described as a greatest Ohio Mason, who is quoted as stating that Masonic archaeologists and students of its history and mysteries are not startled at these discoveries. They know the order is of great antiquity.
So Carson seems to agree strongly with the idea of ancient roots. He wasn't surprised by Belzoni's claims.
He does. He emphasizes that the general doctrinal features, its cosmophyte character, its recognition and teaching of the universal brotherhood of men, which are core to modern Masonry,
The fundamental principles again.
are substantially the same today as they were in the remote ages of antiquity, even though the specific rituals have changed significantly. He even frames those who deny an origin before 1717 as literary knaves and dunces. Very strong. So the core principles are seen as timeless, originating in the deepest past. How does the source trace the movement of these ideas from Egypt through subsequent civilizations?
Well, accepting the Egyptian origin, the author states, makes it easier for us to understand its transmission to the Hebrews after the captivity.
The biblical connection.
Right. The idea presented is that the Hebrews, influenced by their time in Egypt, developed their own version of this old story. This is linked specifically to the legend of a certain widow's son and the building of King Solomon's temple on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem.
Narratives central to later Masonic ritual.
Exactly. It provides a narrative bridge. The influence, according to the source, also spread to other ancient mystery schools, such as the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece and similar traditions in Syria and Persia.
And they all shared common features, according to this view.
The source claims they all are possessors of a similar legend of a death and a resurrection, drawing a parallel across these ancient traditions, including the Egyptian Osiris myth and implicitly the Hiramic legend.
The dying and rising God motif
Seems to be the connection drawn. They are also said to have shared a code of morality, veiled in symbolism and protected by the secret signs and words of explanation possessed only by the initiate.
So, the structure of using symbols to teach morals, protecting knowledge with secrecy, and requiring initiation is seen as a consistent thread throughout this claimed history.
Exactly. And these early mysteries, under other names, are described as being tolerant of the contemporary beliefs of the profane.
Profane, meaning non-members.
Those outside the group. And they attracted many eager souls of many nations questing light, Tolerance and the pursuit of knowledge are presented as consistent characteristics.
Okay, this brings us to what the author describes as the borderland between ancient and modern masonry.
Yeah.
The transition period.
This is the transition, yeah. The address tracks the secret doctrine being carried by the Tyrians, the skilled builders who participated in constructing Solomon's temple on Mount Moriah back to their homeland, Tyre.
Okay.
There, they are said to have formed the Society of Dionysian Architects.
The Dionysian architects. And this group eventually interacted with the Roman world.
Yes. When Roman legions came to Tyre, they brought these skilled workmen back to Rome. These Tyrians passed on their craft and secret system, leading to the formation of the Roman collegia.
The collegia.
Described as fraternities of skilled artificers closely correlated and protected by the same secret system.
These collegias sound quite similar organizationally to later Masonic groups.
The address highlights these similarities as somewhat significant characteristics. Each collegia had its leaders, master, wardens, secretary-treasurer, and required a minimum number for a meeting, a quorum of 3.
The number 3 is important in Masonry.
Very much so. They also used familiar symbols like the square, plumb, level, and compasses, and crucially, secrecy was a key element of their structure. This is presented as a direct organizational link in the lineage.
Okay, so a direct line through these Roman guilds. The address then connects the collegia to the challenges faced by early Christians in Rome.
It states that many of the collegia became affiliated with the strange new cult of Christianity, particularly during periods when Christianity was outlawed. Emperor Diocletian initially tolerated them, but persecution arose when 4 collegia members, skilled artisans, refused to participate in erecting a statue to a pagan god, Asclepius.
Refused on religious grounds.
Presumably, yes. And this led to a notable event in this historical narrative.
Yes, it led to the martyrdom of 4 of the masters and 1 apprentice who refused to compromise their beliefs. These individuals are referred to in the address as our first Masonic martyrs.
The Quatuor Coronati.
Exactly. The significant research lodge mentioned earlier, the Quatuor Coronati of London, is explicitly named after these 4 who today are gratefully remembered by the craftsmen of Europe. This specific historical anecdote is woven in to emphasize the lineage and the values associated with it.
Fascinating connection. What happened to those who escaped this persecution, according to the source?
They are said to have fled, finding refuge on Lake Como in Italy, where they kept the organization and its traditions alive as the Comacene Guild, during the period often referred to as the Dark Ages.
The Comacene Masters. I've heard theories about them being key transmitters.
This source definitely presents them that way. After the Dark Ages, we see the rise of the great cathedral building era in Europe. How does this source connect this to the story?
Well, following the revival of building after figures like Charlemagne, the Comacenes are said to have followed in the wake of the clergy, using their ancient privileges that allowed them to travel freely as free men.
Ah, Freemasons.
Right. This led to the emergence of the cathedral builders, or Freemasons, the old operatives. They traveled widely, welcomed because they were considered the only guilds quite competent to express the spirit of the times in speaking stone.
So these medieval operative Masons are presented as the direct descendants of the Comacene Guild and, through them, the ancient traditions. What was the structure of these operative groups like?
Their organization was based around lodges with a master, fellow crafts, and apprentices. Apprenticeship was a significant commitment, typically requiring 7 years' service.
7 years?
Yeah, a long time. To advance to fellow craft, they had to undergo examination and be deemed duly and truly prepared, worthy, and well qualified. An interesting detail mentioned is that each Mason had his own individual mark, his Mason's mark.
You can still see those marks on old cathedrals.
Exactly. Many are still visible today in the stones.
And the cathedrals themselves were more than just buildings. They were seen as expressions of this knowledge, like books in stone.
The address heavily emphasizes the dependence on symbolic expression. It references Ossian Lang and delves into Victor Hugo's perspective from Notre Dame, using his powerful analogy about architecture.
Hugo's idea.
Right. Hugo argued that the human race had 2 great books: architecture, the Bible of stone, which conveyed knowledge and genius before widespread literacy, and later printing, the Bible of paper.
So the architecture itself was seen as coded symbolism. A way of writing before writing was common.
Exactly. Hugo, as quoted, suggests that genius escaped by way of architecture, and its Iliads took the form of cathedrals. Printing, while revolutionary, caused architecture to lose its central role as the primary mode of cultural expression, leading to the separation of related arts like sculpture, painting, and music, seen almost as a dismemberment.
Like architecture was the mother art.
That's the idea presented. Architecture, in this view, was the unified art form that held and conveyed the deepest knowledge before the print era.
This international operative masonry existed in different forms across Europe then.
Yes. Mentioned examples include the Compagnons in France, the Commissions in Italy, and the Wemgerichte in Germany. The rise of Gothic architecture, particularly in England after the Norman conquest, is highlighted as providing significant work and prosperity for the Freemasons there.
And then the crucial step.
Right. A key transitional point mentioned is that as early as 1600, it was quite common in England for operative lodges to admit speculative members, non-builders.
This acceptance of non-builders marks the shift towards modern masonry. Now, despite building for the church, the source suggests there was tension between the operative masons and the church.
Yes, the claim is made that even in medieval days, the Freemasons did not wholly approve of the church and expressed this subtly by indelibly cartooned this contempt in their carvings on the highest cornices of their handiwork.
Really? What kind of carvings?
Examples mentioned include satirical depictions of clergy or religious figures, a nun and monk in an embrace, an ass reading mass, priests grinding dogmas, apostles in Masonic poses, a fox preaching to geese, things like that.
Wow. Hidden messages high up on the cathedrals. Those are presented as hidden, symbolic critiques within the sacred spaces they built.
Precisely. The address states that the Protestant Reformation brought a distinct break between church and Freemasonry.
How did the city guilds fit into this history compared to the Freemasons? Were they the same?
No, the city guilds are described as a direct offshoot of the traveling Freemasons, sharing some of the philosophy and brotherhood elements, but being quite distinct. They're even said to have sometimes worked for the Freemasons, suggesting the older operative fraternity was the more skilled or prestigious group.
So, harder to get into the Freemasons.
It required unusual skill to enter the older, more artistic fraternity, according to this source, compared to the more accessible city trades.
Okay. The source then quotes Joseph Fort Newton on the ideals that drove operative masonry at its peak.
Yes, Newton describes operative masonry at its zenith, symbolized by the Lion of the tribe of Judah, with strength, wisdom, and beauty its ideals. Their motto was focused on loyalty, to be faithful to God and the government.
God and country, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Their mission was broader than just building. It was to lend itself to the public good and fraternal charity. Keeper of an ancient and high tradition, it was a refuge for the oppressed and a teacher of art and morality to mankind.
So a strong emphasis on moral and social good, even in the operative phase. Not just about stone cutting.
Yes, definitely. The address notes that it was specifically when the Freemasons took liberty for a slogan that the church looked askance, leading to it being frowned upon in Catholic countries due to its perceived independent stance.
Ah, that tension again. Newton is also quoted on the virtues expected of operative members.
Yes. Honesty, trustfulness, fidelity, chastity, and temperance, fealty to the brotherhood, regard for secrecy, reverence in God.
Those sound like pretty fundamental ethical standards.
They do. Newton describes the operative organization as perfect, with the master's word holding significant authority, basically law. There's also a colorful detail about a distinctive uniform they supposedly wore.
A uniform.
Apparently, skin-tight leather breeches, high boots, dark tunics, peaked hats, short swords, and heavy walking sticks. Quite the image.
It certainly is.
While the exact number of degrees in operative masonry is presented as a disputed point, their work is described as simpler, less formal than the later speculative rituals.
Okay, this brings us to the shift towards modern speculative masonry, the form most widely recognized today.
Right. The author frames this as an evolution, driven by the gradual acceptance into the order of men of prominence, influence, intellectuality, and wealth, who were not necessarily operative builders by trade.
So it became about more than just the physical craft itself. The membership changed.
Precisely. The key turning point was when the purely speculative Masons outnumbered the older operatives. This demographic shift fundamentally changed the nature of the fraternity, from primarily a guild of craftsmen to a philosophical and social organization.
And this is reflected in the full name used by many lodges today, FNAM.
Yes. The address explains that originally the builders were Freemasons and the non-builders who were admitted were accepted Masons. Their union in 1717 explains the common acronym FNAM, standing for Free and Accepted Masons.
Right, 1717. The founding event of modern speculative masonry is tied to that specific date and location.
It is. The formation of the First Grand Lodge of England in the year 1717 on St. John's Day. This wasn't a new creation out of nowhere, but a formal union of 4 existing lodges that had been meeting in London taverns.
Taverns, really?
Yeah, the address names them. The Goose and Gridiron Ale House, the Crown Ale House, the Apple Tree Tavern, the Rummer and Grake Tavern.
The image of such a significant organization having roots in taverns is, well, interesting. Seems very grounded.
The author takes a moment to contextualize this, explaining the importance of taverns and coffee houses in 17th century London as vital social centers, where men from all walks of life gathered, described by one source as the busy man's recreation and the Londoner's home.
So it makes sense in that context.
It's presented as a fitting place for early lodges, especially as the members often included the regular patrons of these establishments.
So after this 1717 formation, how is speculative masonry defined in the address? What's the new focus?
It's characterized as an organization of worthy men, humanitarian in their sympathies, moral in their code, practicing brotherly love, relief, and truth, the 3 cardinal principles of Masonic fellowship. The focus clearly shifts from building physical structures
To building something else entirely.
Exactly. The address states that as the era of great stone buildings waned, the successors clung to the old traditions, but applied the ancient philosophy handed down from the days of ancient Egypt by word of mouth, as the author claims, to the building of spiritual temples, each man being his own architect, therefore.
Building character, essentially.
Yes, the individual's moral and spiritual self-improvement becomes the central project.
This philosophical focus is the defining characteristic of modern masonry, as presented here. And this model spread rapidly around the world after 1717.
It did, following England's lead. Grand lodges were soon established in Ireland, Scotland, and across continental Europe. Places like Berlin and France are mentioned, creating what the author calls a universal empire of Freemasonry by the mid-18th century.
How did it arrive and develop in America?
The first charter for America was issued quite early in 1730, covering New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. A particularly famous early lodge met at the Green Dragon Tavern in Boston.
Another tavern.
Yes. And the address makes a direct claim that the Brethren of St. Andrews planned and carried out the Boston Tea Party there.
Wow. That links the fraternity directly to a pivotal event in American history, according to this source's narrative. A very specific claim.
Yes, it places Masonry at the heart of the lead-up to independence. After the U.S. gained independence, the American lodges forsook all obedience to England's Grand Lodge, and each state formed its own governing body, its Masonic sovereignty.
Independent Grand Lodges.
Right. The address acknowledges challenges, mentioning the anti-Masonic movement of the 1820s, but notes that despite this, Masonry has made a steady advance in the U.S.
So, considering this claimed deep history, the evolution from operative craft to speculative philosophy and its global spread, the author asks again, why has it endured? What is the core reason for its resilience and appeal?
The author poses the question, why has this brotherhood withstood the storm and stress of all time? Why it has drawn into its membership some of the best of every generation of the sons of men? And their answer, quoting Albert Pike again, points to a central principle.
And that principle is?
Toleration. Pike, as quoted here, asserts that Masonry alone preaches toleration. He defines this toleration broadly. The right of man to abide by his own faith. The right of all states to govern themselves.
So it's about individual conscience and political self-determination.
That's how it's framed here. In this view, Masonry stands as a force against any power, whether political or religious, that seeks to impose uniformity or suppress freedom of thought or self-governance.
It actively pushes back against intolerance in various forms, according to this perspective.
Exactly. Pike's quote continues, stating that Masonry rebukes alike the monarch who seeks to extend his dominions by conquest, the church that claims the right to suppress heresy by fire and steel, and the confederation of states that insist on maintaining a union by force and restoring brotherhood by slaughter and subjugation.
Strong stuff. It's presented as a champion of intellectual and national liberty against tyranny.
That's the claim. The address acknowledges that there are various definitions of Masonry, but it favors a particular one, a German definition referenced by Joseph Fort Newton.
Okay, what's the gist of that German definition?
It describes Masonry as The activity of closely united men who, employing symbolical forms borrowed principally from the mason's trade and from architecture, work for the welfare of mankind, striving morally to ennoble themselves and others and thereby to bring about a universal league of mankind, which they aspire to exhibit even now on a small scale.
That definition seems to tie together many threads we've discussed. The fellowship, the symbols from building.
Right. The work for others, the self-improvement, and that idea of being a model for universal brotherhood.
It encapsulates those elements well. It highlights both the internal work morally to ennoble themselves and the external mission, work for the welfare of mankind. It also emphasizes the idea of creating a model or example of universal brotherhood on a small scale within the fraternity itself.
And this reflects, the author says, a growing humanitarian ideal within Masonry, a realization that in a measure we are directly responsible for man's well or ill-being.
This growing sense of responsibility leads the author to discuss Masonry's engagement with the world, including areas like politics and social service.
Right. The address states that more and more the deeper Masonic thinkers are awakening to the fact that if Masonry would hold its own as a world force, it must exert its great influence and strength in the arena of world politics.
That's a significant statement, suggesting that to remain relevant globally, Masonry needs to be involved in shaping world affairs, not just stay within its lodge rooms.
It implies a move towards a more active, outwardly focused role. However, the author immediately contrasts the approach taken in the U.S. versus other regions like Latin America. They state that conditions in the U.S. haven't yet compelled Masons to have part actively in politics as such.
Not as such, but the author does suggest a specific, maybe controversial approach for Masons in the U.S. context, don't they?
Yes, the address presents what it calls an unwritten law implied by our obligations. It suggests that when fellow Masons are candidates for office, you should always give them the preference with your ballot before other men, assuming, of course, all other things being equal.
Okay, and the stated reason for this preference?
It's presented as a means to withstand the growing encroachments of clericalism upon our daily life and ideals, and most upon our American political life. Now, it's really important for you, the listener, to understand this point neutrally. This is the author's specific viewpoint from this historical source.
Right.
A strategy advocated at that time to counter what they perceived as a threat from organized religious influence in politics. It's not necessarily a universally accepted Masonic principle today, and we're certainly not endorsing it, just reporting what's in the text.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
Just presenting the source material's perspective. In contrast to the U.S. situation presented, the source points to Masons in Latin America as having blazed the trail through united action in politics.
Right, taking a more direct role.
Giving historical examples of this.
Yes, they are credited with having drove the hated Spanish Inquisition from the shores of the New World. In Mexico, Masons are claimed to have had a political platform since 1833 that was later formulated as the Laws of Reform and incorporated into the nation's Constitution of 1857, linked to figures like Madero and Carranza.
So that's presented as historical evidence of Masonry actively intervening in political matters, seemingly more directly than the suggested approach for the U.S. at that time.
That's the comparison being drawn in the text. Beyond politics, the address also highlights the importance of social service.
Yes, this is identified as another latter-day call upon the craft, indicating a growing emphasis on direct charitable and community support efforts.
The address notes that in some cities, Masonic social service has been developed to the highest degree of efficiency, highlighting this practical form of humanitarian work.
Okay, so with all these layers, ancient claims, global scale, challenges like member ignorance, aspirations for world influence and service, how does the author suggest an individual member should engage and truly be an active worker in this fellowship? What should you do?
Well, the address emphasizes that effective service requires being tireless in his efforts. It lays out specific actions for members to take.
What are some of those recommended actions?
Maintaining a close connection with your lodge is foundational, pretty basic. Also, making the visiting stranger feel at home, that embodies the spirit of hospitality and brotherhood.
Welcoming visitor.
Right. The author also touches on the challenge of repetitive ritual, suggesting members can aid the master in varying the monotony of the ceaseless grinding of our degree mills.
Degree mills, that's a telling phrase.
It is. The author admits its endless repetition driven by a surge in membership. Wave of Masonic enthusiasm is the phrase used. This implies a need to inject vitality and meaning into the lodge experience beyond just performing the ceremonies. Keep it fresh.
It's about enriching the experience for everyone. And personal development is crucial. Self-study.
Absolutely. The core recommendation for self-improvement is, if you would better fit yourself for the Fellowship of Freemasonry as an active worker, inform yourself of its splendid traditions, its history, aims, and present-day activities. Understanding is key to active participation. You can't be active if you don't know what it's about.
And the address suggests resources for this study.
Yes, it recommends using readable Masonic magazines and periodicals for those of you pressed for time, or delving into weightier tomes of Masonic lore for the book lover, again mentioning Albert Pike's work as an example.
So options for different levels of engagement.
Right. The author feels that at this time, 1917, we Masons are just finding ourselves, and there is much that we must do.
A sense of potential yet to be fulfilled.
Exactly. To meet the challenges of signs of unrest and new issues, new conditions, the address concludes this section by stressing the need for Masons to stay connected through their lodges, chapters, clubs, and related organizations. The purpose is to take counsel together and plan for the future while showing an unrelaxing interest in the present.
So, communication and planning are key.
This reinforces the need for collective effort and continuous engagement to face contemporary challenges effectively.
This call to action ties back to the image of the awakening giant needing active members to fulfill its potential. But the address makes a crucial distinction. Being an active member isn't just about showing up or performing ritual. It's deeper than that.
Exactly. The author strongly argues there is much more to Masonry than the continuous repetition of ritualism. While acknowledging that ritual serves a function in reminding members of the great philosophy and has historically contributed to making better men, squarer men, truer men.
The positive side of ritual.
Yes. But they contend that it has failed utterly for a certain type of member.
Who are these members who are missed by the ritual? Who does it fail for?
Those who came merely to be raised from a dead level to a living perpendicular, a phrase from Masonic ritual, signifying initiation, but who then pass out again to the profane.
Back to the outside world, unchanged.
Right. Those outside the fraternity, the non-Masons, these are the individuals who go through the motions but don't integrate the philosophy into their lives.
The author has a rather pointed description for them, don't they? It's a specific label.
Yes. The address uses the term button Mason to describe this type, someone who flaunts his emblem proudly, but is altogether out of touch with the brotherhood, with the lodge, with himself.
Just wearing the pin.
Exactly. This is a member, according to the author, who only comes to lodge unless it be to dine. It's a sharp critique of superficial membership that doesn't go beyond wearing the symbol or attending social functions.
So if it's more than ritual and symbols, what is the true essence of Masonry, the splendid fellowship, according to this source? Where does the real value lie?
The address describes it not just as humor connection, but a glorious interlacing fellowship. This involves two dimensions: the fellowship of man with the great architect of the universe, the invisible, incorporeal one God, emphasizing the individual's relationship with the divine.
The vertical connection.
And the fellowship of man with men, the mutual recognition of brotherhood, focusing on human connection.
The horizontal connection. It's a bond that is both spiritual and human.
Precisely. This dual fellowship is what expresses both human ideals and spiritual aspirations. Masonry, throughout its claimed long history, has served as a bearer of the secret doctrine of fellowship with the goal of teaching man to live in harmony with man.
The author mentions a great quest that Masons are undertaking. What's that about?
Yes, they refer to it as the steady secret search that all Masons are making, acknowledging that some have found the goal and some have not. The secret doctrine in this context isn't something automatically revealed upon joining. It's something the individual must actively seek to understand. It's a personal journey.
And how is this doctrine unraveled for the individual? How do you find the goal?
According to the address, the secret doctrine is unraveled insofar as a man senses his proximity to his God and his brotherly responsibility for his kind.
Ah, so it comes back to that dual fellowship.
Exactly. Understanding the doctrine is directly linked to one's personal spiritual awareness and their ethical obligation towards their fellow human beings. It's not about intellectual knowledge alone, but about lived experience and embodied principles.
This leads us to the profound question that the address culminates in, moving beyond history and organization to the heart of individual identity. When is a man a Mason?
This question is presented as the ultimate test, isn't it? Shifting the focus entirely from titles or membership or degrees to character and conduct. The author states that the answer can be found in that Blue Lodge classic, The Builders, by Bro Joseph Fort Newton. Blue Lodge typically refers to the first 3 degrees of Masonry.
Okay, let's explore Newton's definition as it's presented in this source. What are the qualities of the person who truly embodies what it means to be a Mason? What does that look like?
It's a really rich, multifaceted definition focusing on inner state and outward action. First, it's when a man can behold the vastness of creation, rivers, the hills, and the far horizon, and feel a sense of his own littleness in the vast scheme of things, and yet possess faith, hope, and courage, which is described as the root of every virtue.
Humility combined with inner strength. That's a powerful balance.
It is the next quality. When he knows that down in his heart, every man is as noble, as vile, as divine, as diabolic, and as lonely as himself. This deep understanding of shared human nature in all its complexity.
The good and the bad in everyone.
Right. It leads him to seek to know, to forgive, and to love his fellow man. It emphasizes empathy and a striving for connection despite flaws.
Seeing the shared humanity in everyone, warts and all.
Exactly. And flowing from that empathy, when he knows how to sympathize with men in their sorrow, yea, even in their sins, knowing that each man fights a hard fight against many odds. This is active compassion, understanding that everyone faces challenges and struggles.
It's about non-judgmental support then, understanding the struggle.
Yes. The definition also includes practical relational skills. Quote, when he has learned how to make friends and to keep them, and above all, to keep friends with himself.
That last part is crucial, being okay with yourself.
It highlights the importance of healthy relationships with others and inner peace or self-acceptance.
Being at ease with oneself, that's hard work.
It is. Another point is, when he can be happy and high-minded amid the meaner drudgeries of life, finding joy and maintaining integrity even in mundane or difficult circumstances.
Grace under pressure, maybe.
And demonstrating active generosity, when no voice of distress reaches his ears in vain and no hand seeks his aid without response. This person is actively responsive to the suffering and needs of others, directly reflecting the principle of relief.
A tangible expression of the ideals, not just talk.
Yes. The definition continues with foundational human capacities. When he knows how to pray, how to love, how to hope, these are presented as essential for a fully realized human being.
Core human experiences.
And maintaining integrity across all aspects of life. When he has kept faith with himself, with his fellow man, with his God, loyalty to one's own values, to others, and to the divine. Trifold loyalty.
The definition concludes with a powerful, almost poetic image.
It really does. It describes this man as having in his hand a sword for evil, in his heart a bit of a song, glad to live, but not afraid to die.
Wow. That paints a picture of someone capable of confronting wrong, a sword for evil, while maintaining joy and optimism. A bit of a song. They embrace life fully, glad to live, but face mortality with serenity, not afraid to die.
That's a profound and compelling description of a life well lived, isn't it?
It truly is.
And the author explicitly states that the man who embodies these qualities has found the only real secret of Masonry.
The only real secret. So despite all the talk of ancient secret doctrines, hidden symbols, passwords, the real secret, according to the source, isn't historical information or hidden knowledge, but this way of being. This character.
That's the central argument presented here. This character, this combination of virtues, relationships, and outlook on life, is what is described as the one which it is trying to give all the world.
So the goal isn't to keep the secret, but to share it by living it.
From this perspective, the ultimate goal and purpose of Masonry is the cultivation and expression of this specific type of ethical, spiritual, and engaged human being.
Wow. I've taken quite a journey through this address, haven't we? Exploring a specific and very detailed perspective on Freemasonry.
We really have.
We've delved into its core definition as a fellowship striving for high ideals, its claims of deep ancient roots stretching back to Egypt and beyond, its evolution through history from operative builders to a speculative philosophy.
Its scale and potential as a global force, particularly in that post-WWI era, its internal challenges like member ignorance, the button mason problem.
Right. And its aspirations for influencing the world through tolerance, social service, and perhaps even politics, depending on the context.
We've seen how this source weaves together archaeology, biblical narratives, the history of guilds and architecture, martyrdoms, and revolutions to construct a lineage for the fraternity. It's quite a narrative.
It is. And critically, we've seen how it pivots from these grand historical and organizational claims to land on a deeply personal definition of what it truly means to be a Mason, drawn from Joseph Fort Newton's writing.
That definition embodying humility, empathy, compassion, resilience, joy, integrity, and courageous engagement with the world is presented not as a hidden fact for initiates, but as the very only real secret that Masonry exists to share with the world.
It reframes the entire enterprise, suggesting that the rituals, history, and structure are ultimately means to an end.
Right, the end being the cultivation of a specific kind of virtuous individual.
It brings the focus right back to the individual member, implying that the success of the awakening giant and the realization of its grand historical purpose ultimately depends on each person's commitment to becoming that spiritual temple.
The kind of man described in that powerful definition.
So, thinking about that definition, when is a man a Mason?
Yeah.
What does it imply about the ultimate purpose of this long-standing institution, as presented in this document?
Well, it suggests that perhaps the true work of this fraternity, its deepest mission, isn't necessarily in preserving ancient secrets or accumulating power.
But maybe in the continuous personal and collective effort to build men who embody brotherly love, relief, and truth in a way that benefits themselves, their community, and the wider world. That's quite a thought.
It is indeed a way of being, not just a membership.
And that's something for you to consider about the nature of this long-standing fellowship.